Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and this design tutorial series that I'm working on right now. Today I'm going to be giving you a brief tour of Affinity Publisher, which is a professional level desktop publishing software that really gives InDesign a run for its money. Now this software is ideal for creating both your book covers and your interiors, and it really is a true replacement for InDesign. Now InDesign, as probably most of you know, is the industry standard when it comes to publishing software. Now, InDesign is something that I've been using for close to 15 years now, and it's an amazing program. It's robust, it's got a ton of features, but the main drawback for most people is it has too many features that probably most of you aren't going to be able to use or even need when you're creating your low content books. And B, InDesign is just really cost prohibitive for most people. It's a subscription model, which is a real irritant to a lot of users, including myself, of InDesign, whereas Affinity Publisher is just a one-time payment and it's under $100. I think in US dollars, it's probably around the $50 or $60 mark. And this is a real bargain for a program that has almost just as much functionality as a program like InDesign, but definitely has everything that you could possibly think to need or want in a desktop publishing software. Now, if you've been creating your covers and interiors in a program like PowerPoint or Google Slides or Keynote or something like that, this is really going to be a game changer for you. This is just going to have so much more functionality than you're used to, and just really open up some doors to giving you a really, a much more professional end result. Now, I know a lot of you are using those programs because you simply don't know how to use any of these professional softwares. But if this is something you're serious about, then making that small investment into something professional like Affinity Publisher or InDesign, if you want to go whole hog on it, then that's just really going to bring your designs up to the next level. Some of you may not know this, but those programs that I just mentioned, PowerPoint, Keynote, Google Slides, those are meant for on-screen presentations. So they were never intended to create print-ready documents, and that's why they're lacking so many of the features that you're probably going to want to use. And once you get a program like this, it's just going to make your design process so much more streamlined, and your end result is going to be something that you're a lot more proud of. So let's flip the screen now. I'm just going to give you a bit of the tour of the interface today. We're not actually going to design anything right now. Next week, I'm going to show you how to make a basic weekly planner. But before we dive into that, it's a good idea to just take a look at some of the features that Affinity Publisher offers and just kind of get a sense of what this program can do for you if you decide to get it somewhere down the line. So let's flip the screen and we'll take a look. All right, so let's just go ahead and open up a new Affinity Publisher document. So I'm going to go to File, New, and then we're going to get a window pop up that's just going to give us all of those basic parameters that you'll normally want to set up before you actually open up your document. So we've got type at the top. And for our purposes, we're always going to be wanting to use the print press ready. That's going to give us that high quality print. And here we've got a bunch of different page preset sizes, which are handy if you want to use any of these. Now for document units, if you're like me, you're probably going to be using inches, but you can set that up however you want. For image placement policy, you've got prefer embedded and prefer linked. Either one of these is going to be fine, but if you choose prefer linked, what that is going to enable you to do is edit any images that you've placed in the document after they've already been placed. So let's say I've got a vector graphic that I'm going to be using in my document, and then I decide later on, after it's already been placed, that I want to do some editing to that. I can then open that up in Illustrator or whatever vector editing software that I've used. And I'm talking about opening up the original file. Once I save the edit in that program, it will then update in this program. So that's really handy because you won't have to actually place the image again. So if you're working with images that you like to do some edits to on the fly, then you can choose prefer linked. If you're not, if the images that you're going to place in this document are at their final point, you're not going to be doing any more editing, then you can just leave Prefer Embedded. Now we've got a number of pages here, which you can choose. This is default master, so you can just leave that clicked. We'll talk about master pages in a few minutes. And then you can go down here, and this is where you're going to enter your page dimensions. Now, one thing you want to make sure of here is DPI should always be set to 300. That is the minimum required DPI for printing. So that is different to on screen, which would be 72. That would be the standard. So we want to keep that at 300. Now this button here, facing pages, all this means is that when we open up our document, our pages are going to be sitting side by side. So it's as if you've got a book in front of you with open. So you can see both pages. So I always like to design with facing pages because it just really helps with the design of the book, the overall page spread, if you can see both of them side by side. Now we want to keep that arranged horizontally, and we're going to want to start on the right page. So we'll just click OK. Actually, wait a minute, there's a couple more tabs here. So color, we want this to be on CMYK. This is what CMYK is, the color mode that you want to use for printing. So we'll leave that as is. Don't worry about color profile, and you don't have to worry about clicking this transparent background. Here's where you set up your margins. Then, of course, you're going to want to make sure your bleed is at 0.125 inches all the way around. So we'll hit OK, and then we're into our document. So this is what the Affinity Publisher interface looks like. Okay, so we did set up our margins in that beginner tab, but why aren't we seeing them here? So right now we are in preview mode, and you'll see how handy that is in a few minutes. Well, actually, you're going to see it right now. I'm going to take myself out of preview mode, and the quickest way to do this is with a quick keyboard shortcut. You're going to hit Control and W. Now we've got our margins. So this is great when we're setting up our design. We can set up everything adhering to our margins. If we want to include a grid to design to, that will all show up here. But then obviously, once we get a lot of design elements on the page, we're going to want to see what that looks like without all of these guides and what it will look like as it's printed. So then you can go into preview mode, which, as I said, is Control W, and that will just get rid of all of those guides, and you'll be able to see just the design that you've got on the page. So we'll enable that again, and now we've got our margins set up. I'm going to go back to our one page here, and we'll just start by taking a brief tour of the different toolbars. So on the left, you've got your main toolbar here. And once you start clicking on some of these tools, you're going to notice that this toolbar at the top is going to change. So according to what tool you've clicked into here, you're going to get all of the different features of that tool show up at the top here. And you're going to be able to adjust that tool to suit whatever task it is that you're doing in the moment. So we'll come back to that toolbar in just a second. We'll swing over to the right, and here we've got our color palette, swatches, stroke. Down here we've got layers. We've got our character palette, paragraph, text styles, and we'll look at some of these in more detail in just a few moments. And we've got a few other things down here like transform, navigator, history. So we're not going to get too much into that today. This is a really robust program, so the last thing I want to do is kind of overwhelm you with all of the capabilities all at once and have you end up being more confused than if you hadn't seen this at all. So I want to try and avoid that. All right, so let's go back over to the left toolbar. This is called the Move tool, and this is the Node tool. Now I'm going to leave the Node tool alone because it's not really a functionality that's appropriate for beginners, so we're just going to skip that right now. One of the things you're going to be using the most is the Frame Text tool. So you're going to click on that, and then wherever you want this text frame, you're just going to click and drag. So let's line that up with our margins, and let's just start typing some random stuff here that isn't going to make any sense. All right, good enough. Actually, before we move on, I just want to point something out because some of you might be wondering why our margins are not perfectly centered here. We've got a little bit of extra on the inside. And the reason is, and I'm going to add a page here just to show you. So to do that, we're going to go to the page palette and we're going to not add a master, we're going to add a regular page. And we'll add 2 pages after the first one. Okay. All right, this is probably going to make a little bit more sense now. So you've probably heard the term gutter before, and the books that KDP prints are using the perfect bound printing process, or bounding process rather. So what that means is it's going to be glued together along the spine here. And you need to add about 1/4 inch that will just allow for that glue. That's basically going to be space that you can't use. So we always want to add just a little bit. If you add about 1/4 inch, that should do it. And that's basically just going to make it so that whatever content is closest to the inside edge here isn't going to be too close to the spine and make it difficult to read or view in any way. All right, so now that we know that, we'll go back to the first page and we'll just play around with our type a little bit. All right, so let's play around with the font. So to do that, we can head up to this top toolbar, and this is going to be where all of your available fonts are. So you can just scroll down and pick whatever you want. Let's just go with Gotham for now. And we'll make it a bit bigger so you can see what we're doing. So as you can see, I'm just kind of scrolling up and down this list and the font is changing on the fly here. All right, I'll zoom in a little bit too. So zoom, you can either use the shortcut of Command+, which will be different on a PC, or there's this zoom tool right at the bottom left-hand toolbar right here. All right, so I'll select that again, and so we can change that to whatever this particular font that we're in has available. So this particular Gotham set that I've got comes in book and bold, so you can kind of just choose what you like there. You choose the size here. If you want to choose something like underline, you can do that. Now I'm just going to get out of preview. I'm going to go into preview mode here. And that's just going to get rid of that red squiggle, which is just showing me that I have a spelling error, obviously. But I want you to be able to see what we're doing. So if we go over to the right here, there's a character palette, and this again is another place where you can change the font. So again, I've got Gotham, 16 point. The weight is book, and there's some decorations down here. So we've got no underline, underline, double underline, and then strike through, no strike through, whatnot. Now this is where things get really exciting if you're like me and love to fine-tune your typography. This is probably going to be very new to a lot of you who are just using basic programs to create your interiors, but this gives you a lot of control. Now I don't want you to get too hung up on this stuff. We're going to leave kerning alone. Kerning basically just manually adjusts the spacing between letters. We don't need that too much. You can just feel free to leave that. Tracking though is something you might want to experiment with. So tracking is essentially, it adjusts the spacing between the letters all at once. So as you can see, I can just scroll, this is at 0. I can remove space to make my letters look tighter, or I can increase the space to give things a looser appeal. So it might actually be more helpful if I type out something that actually makes sense. So all right, so another way that we can adjust the tracking aside from this is we can just hit the Option key and our right arrow key. So as you can see, this is just really helpful in creating a little bit more of an aesthetically pleasing group of words. Things like titles really benefit from adding a little bit of tracking. This is not something you want to overdo, but it is nice to have that little bit of control just to help with the aesthetics of whatever the typography is that you're using. Now there's a few other things that we can do with this character palette. I'm not going to go too much into them. You can obviously play around on your own. So we'll go over to paragraph. Now this is where you're going to be able to adjust the alignment. So we've got left, center, right. Now you can also do this up at the top here. So just remember, anytime you're using any one of these tools, a lot of those tools' options can then be accessed up here. But there are going to be a few options that you're going to need to go into the palette because there's just so many of them. So like I said, this is where you set your alignment. You can set spacing for before paragraphs or after paragraphs. You can set indents. Anything like that. So let's just put this back to left alignment for a sec. So this is our first line indent there. So that's just going to give us an indent. We've got a left indent. That would indent the entire paragraph, so not just the first line. We've got right indent, and we've got space before paragraph and space after paragraph. And this is the paragraph leading. So leading is somewhat similar to tracking. So with tracking, we're adding space between letters to move letters apart. And with leading, that is the amount of space that's between lines in a paragraph. So let's just delete that for a second. And I'm going to go to text, and I'm going to insert filler text here, just so we can take a look at some of these options. So this is the default leading, and then I can adjust that just by scrolling up and down here. So if we want our design to look a little bit airier, we can make those spaces between the lines as big or as small as we want. So this type of functionality is something that you most likely haven't seen in some of the programs that you might be using that aren't intended for desktop publishing. So you're just going to get that much more control over your typography. So let's just leave it at default for now. Now before we move on, we'll just take a look at color. So you can either select the text by clicking 3 times, and it'll select the entire, everything that's in your text box, or you can just select the text box itself. And you can go up to color here, and we can just play around with these sliders. So you've got the key CMYK color space here. So C gives you cyan. Actually, let's get rid of the black so you can actually see what's going on. So we've got cyan, magenta, and yellow. So this is how you're going to get different colors. Now, most likely you're going to be just using shades of black for your interiors, but this is going to come in handy for your covers. So you can either use the sliders like so to get whatever color you're looking for, or if you have a hex color in mind. Now, for those of you that don't know what a hex is, when you're creating any sort of color on a screen, it doesn't matter what shade that color is, of what color, it's going to have a numerical, an alphanumerical code for it. So let's just open up the color picker. If you have that hex, you can just enter it right here. So for example, black, the hex code for black is 000000. And if I wanted to do white, the hex code is FFFFFF. Anyways, you get the point. Alternatively, you'll most likely also be able to place an image into this, and you should be able to use probably this color picker tool, and you'll be able to sample whatever that exact color is, and then you can again plug that into, let's say you wanted to match your typography color to an image that you're using. Obviously this would be for your cover. Then you can go ahead and do that. Okay, let's get rid of this. All right, moving down the line, we've got the table tool. So that's just going to allow us to add a table, which is handy for creating things like calendars. So as I'm dragging it out, you can just see there's a little C with a number and an R with a number on it. And that's just telling us how many columns and rows. So that's your table tool. And of course, there'll be multiple ways of formatting that, which we won't get into right now. All right, we're going to skip this artistic text tool for now. The pen tool as well. This will be handy for creating lines. So once you've clicked pen, we're going to go up to the different options we've got here. We want to look for mode, and we've got line mode. So we want to make sure that that is clicked. You're just going to click, and if you want a straight line across, you can hold the shift key and just click however long you want that line, and then you've got one. Wait a minute, that didn't work. All right, there we go. Now, once you've drawn that line, you can again go up here. You're probably not going to want a fill if it's just a line. You're going to want that stroke. This is where you can change the color of the stroke, and you can change the width of the stroke. So you can also, okay, let's just change the width here. You can see. So we are on solid line right now, but you can also do dashed line, and you can do some artistic stuff here. We're not going to get into that right now, but generally for lines, if you're doing something for a line journal, I would probably do something like half a point. I definitely wouldn't go any wider than 1 point. And of course, if you want to get fancy, you can also use the pen tool to create shapes. Now, this is a lot more advanced, so probably I would just suggest staying away from this unless you know what you're doing. But basically, you can use these Bezier curves to create any type of shape that you want. Once you've connected that, you can go in and add a color. You could potentially add a stroke, which we have, and you could go in and play around with that. But again, this is, it's a little bit more advanced. Obviously, feel free to experiment. Now we've also got some pre-made shapes here. Rectangle, ellipse, all these kind of funkier ones down here. So you're basically just going to click on whatever shape and just drag that out. If you hold the shift key as you're dragging it out, that'll constrain the proportions so that you don't get any of this kind of thing happening. And with this, again, you can either change the color and the stroke up here, or you can head over to the color palette and do it over here. All right, we're going to skip a couple of things here, and we'll go down to this gradient fill tool. Then we'll head on over to the shape, and we can just drag out however we want that gradient. So you can kind of see a slight difference there. And I'm just going to change the color of the gradient so you can get more of a better view of that. So you can click the different endpoints here and just kind of make an adjustment. And then you could click the other handle here and do the same thing. All right, and then after the fact, you can just grab it. You can move that around. So this is a linear gradient, but we could go up here. We could create an elliptical gradient, a radial one. Radial one obviously works better when the endpoint's right in the beginning. So you can see that's looking more like a radial gradient there. All sorts of different options for the gradient tool. Okay, now at any given point, if we want to reduce the opacity of a shape or an image, we can click on whatever that is, our image or design element, and then we'll head over to the layers palette, which is right here. And here's where you can set the opacity. So we can turn that up or down. And obviously you can get some interesting results if you start layering some shapes. So we'll just pick an ellipse tool here. We'll just get rid of the gradient on that. Just make that a solid red, and we'll just get rid of the stroke. And then if I adjust the transparency, you'll kind of see what's underneath. So you can get all kinds of interesting results just playing around with this type of thing. Now we're going to skip over the eyedropper tool for now and the hand tool, and I've already shown you the zoom tool. And I have already showed you the color, but again, whatever element that you'd like to change the color of, and let's just put that back to 100. You're going to use the colors palette. So you can play around with the sliders this way, or you can click this and choose a color this way, or you can enter that hex code. If you have the hex code, you can enter it there. So lots of different ways to choose your colors. And there's your stroke. So I don't know, let's do that purple for a second. And then if you want to increase the width of your stroke, you can either do that up here, as I showed you before, or you can do that in the stroke palette right here. Now, one thing I didn't show you, but I might just quickly show you, I'll go back to the pen tool and create another line. So we've got this rounded cap selected, but if you want, you can choose to cut that off, or you can do a square cap. The rest of the stuff you don't really need to concern yourself with just right now. All right, so let's just head over to the Pages palette again. Basically already showed you this, but this is where you've got your master page, and this is where you add a page. You can duplicate selected pages, and if you want to trash a page, you can delete it. So basically you would just choose a page or a spread, and I could just throw that out. Now just get rid of that page. I'm just going to undo that, and we'll talk a little bit about the Layers palette. The most common situation that you would find the Layers palette really useful is if you're using let's say a KDP cover template in your cover file. So in Affinity Publisher, each element is on its own separate layer. So things are always going to be sitting either on top or underneath another design element. So let's say we're using that KDP cover template, that can sit on top of all of your other design elements on its own layer. And what we can actually do is lock the layers so that it doesn't move when you're trying to access design elements that are sitting underneath it. And you can also raise or lower the opacity so that you can see what's underneath it. It's also really handy if you've got a really complex cover design. Let's say you've got like a whole bunch of really, really small flowers, and then you've got some typography that sits over top of that. And maybe you're trying to select the text box to do some edits to your text, but you keep accidentally selecting some of the floral elements behind it. You can keep the floral elements on their own separate layers and lock those in place so that you have no problem selecting your text. So you can see this ellipse is on a layer above the star. So if I want to lock that, I can do so, and now I can just freely grab that star underneath it, and that circle doesn't get disrupted at all. Of course, I can lock that and unlock that anytime I want. You can also rearrange the orders. So I can grab that ellipse and I can actually just move it underneath the star if I want to. All right, let's quickly place an image here. All right, we'll just place this random image here. Now to adjust the size, you can just grab one of these handles. To move it around, you're just going to grab it with that selection tool, or I guess it's called the move tool with Publisher. Again, we can go over here and play around with the transparency if we want. And so we can head over to the crop tool if we want. And we can just drag handles around. If I wanted to cut off the top of that image, I could do that. One more thing I'll quickly show you here, and we'll head up to the master page for that. Probably would have been handier for me to show this at the beginning, because this is something you would generally do at the beginning of creating your document. But if we wanted to create a grid just to help us with our design, we would go up to View and go to Guides Manager. And now we can set up either horizontal or vertical guides. So generally when I'm doing design work, I like to set up both horizontal and vertical guides. So we'll click on vertical here, and this will give us the option to choose columns. So depending on your design, you can have as many different columns as you want. You can adjust the gutter to whatever you want. And this is just pretty much helpful for, let's say you wanted a column of text that, only spanned half of a column, and you could kind of just, adjust that accordingly. And then maybe you wanted to put, I don't know, like an image or something right here, then you could do that. We'll just pretend that's our image for now, but you kind of get the gist. It just helps you to arrange your design elements in much more of a pleasing fashion than if you were just trying to eyeball everything. We won't get too far into that, but it's just nice to know that that feature exists, and it's something you're probably going to want to use when you're doing interior designs. Okay, so those are pretty much all the tools that you're going to have any need to use when you're doing either your covers or your interiors. There are a lot more features to this program. Obviously, experiment, play around, just don't get too hung up in trying to master every one of these tools. There's a lot here. Probably going to find that you've got a few core tools that you always use, and just try and master those ones as best you can. Now, the final thing you're going to want to do here, obviously, is you're going to want to export your document so that it's print ready for KDP. So we're going to hit export, and you're going to want to make sure that you are on the PDF tab. None of these other ones are going to be any good for you. So PDF, and you could choose the PDF for print. There are a couple other ones that you can use, like PDF X1A, but for our purposes, PDF for print is going to be just fine. Make sure that you're at 300 DPI, and you definitely want to have include bleed checked off if you have a bleed. If you aren't using a bleed on your interior document, and probably most times you won't, but if you do have a bleed that you're using, then you're going to want to check this off, because that will be required for when you upload to KDP. So again, if you don't have a bleed, untick that. If you are using one, make sure it's ticked. That's just reminding me that that's actually one thing I didn't show you. So before we sign off here, I'm just going to cancel that, and I'll just point out this gray line around the edge of your document. That is the bleed. So if you decide you're going to have an image that goes to the edge of your page, you want to make sure that that is lined up with your bleed. And you are going to want to zoom in as close as you can and make sure that it's not kind of like that. Otherwise, that document will get rejected. So it has to click to the bleed. You can even pull it beyond the bleed. That's fine too. But you just want to make sure that all of your images that go to the edge of the page actually do line up to the edges of that bleed. All right, so back to our exporting of the document. We'll go to export, and we're on PDF, PDF for print, include bleed. Now here's another thing that you've got to pay attention to for area. We were designing in all spreads. You do not want it exported in all spreads. KDP wants that in single pages. So we're going to click all pages. And that's just going to create a PDF document of single pages rather than spreads like we've got here. Now this pages box here, that's if you wanted to export only certain pages. You're probably never going to have a need for that, so you can leave that alone, and then you'll hit export, and then you will have your document. All right, that is it. So those are the basic main features that you're going to be using in Affinity Publisher with regards to creating both book covers and interiors with your low content books. So if you're interested in the free trial of Affinity Publisher, I will leave a link to that in the description below. Now, I'm not an affiliate or anything like that. I just think this is a really, really fantastic alternative to InDesign. Now, as I mentioned before, next week, I'm going to be showing you how to create a weekly planner using Affinity Publisher. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the bell, and that way you can get notified each time I come out with one of these videos. And if you want my free guide, 3 steps to publishing your first low content book in less than a day, then I'll leave that in the description below as well. And of course, more low content publishing tips over at my blog, rachelharrisonsund.com. So thanks again, guys, and we will see you next week. Bye.